We're learning arrays and for loops in Java. We're going to start off by making a really simple array and then just looping through it using a for loop. An array is just a list of variables. So if we make an int array, then that's just a list of integer variables. We indicate that we want an array by typing square brackets after our variable type. So we'll type int array, array1 equals new int square brackets, semicolon, and inside of these second square brackets, we put the size of our array. So that's just the size of our integer list. Let's put 50 elements in it. So array1 is now a list of 50 integer variables. Each of these variables is called an element or an index in our array. And we can fill up these elements by typing the name of the array, square brackets, the element we want to fill up, and then equals whatever value we want to put inside of it. Array indexes start at 0, so our array of 50 elements is numbered 0 to 49. The reason array indexes start at 0 is that it's just easier for computers to do something called offset calculations, which is just how computers locate indexes in arrays. So pretty much it's just faster for the computer if array indexes start at 0 instead of 1. So that's why they start at 0. It takes a little bit of getting used to. So we filled our 0th element with the value 15. Now let's fill element number 1 with a value of 20. And element number 2 with a value of 30. And if we wanted to fill up all 50 elements, this would get really tedious. We'd have to type 50 different lines of code. So this is where for loops come into the picture. For loops are the most common way to iterate through an array. Let's make a for loop that will fill up this array with random values. We'll go for int I equals 0, while I is less than array1 dot length I plus plus. So the int I equals 0 just indicates that the counter we're using for our for loop is the variable I, and we want that counter to start at 0. This second part of our for loop after the first semicolon is called the loop continuation condition. As long as this condition evaluates to true, then the loop is going to keep looping. This condition can be anything that evaluates to true or false. After the loop continuation condition, we put a semicolon, and then we indicate how much we want I to increase by for every pass of the loop. So after every pass of this loop, I is going to increase by 1. I plus plus is just shorthand for I equals I plus 1. Increasing the value of something by 1 is just something that we do so often that there's a really easy shortcut for it. And note that there is no semicolon after the third part of our for loop. So we have a semicolon after our loop continuation condition, but no semicolon after we indicate how much we want I to increase by for every pass of the loop. Inside of our for loop, let's just print out the value of I. So the first pass through our loop, I is going to be 0. So we'll get I is 0 printed to the screen. And then I will keep increasing all the way up to 49. It'll print out I is 49. After that pass, I will increase to 50. And at that point, I will no longer be less than the array.length because the array length is 50 and I will be 50. Let's save this and run it just to take a look at our output. So we get I is 0 all the way up to I is 49. And we could have put while I is less than 50, since our array length is 50. This would accomplish the same thing, but the reason we put array1.length is because this way, if the array changes in length at some point, if we decide that in our program we actually want 100 values inside of it or 1000, then this array1.length will automatically change. So we won't have to go through all of our code updating the value 50 to 1000. So we've printed out the value of I inside of our for loop. Now let's assign the value of I into the values in our array. So for each pass, whatever index we're at in the array is going to get the value of I. So we can say array1 I equals I. So now the values in our 1000 element array will fill up with numbers from 0 to 999. So we have I is 0 all the way up to I is 999. Now let's fill up our array going the opposite way. The first time we filled up the 0th element with the value 0 and then worked our way all the way up to 999. This time, let's start I at array length minus 1. So int I equals array1.length minus 1. This will start us at 999, and it illustrates an important point to remember, which is that the size of the array is always one more than the index of the last element in it. So right now, the index of the last element in our array is 999, even though the size of our array is 1000. It's really easy to get this mixed up and to throw what's called an array index out of bounds exception, which is exactly what it sounds like when you try setting an element that's outside of the bounds of the array. So if we tried filling up element 1000, that element doesn't exist, and Java will throw an exception because we're trying to access memory that isn't a part of the array. So for our for loop that counts backwards, we're going to start at array1.length minus 1, since this is the last index in the array. And then we'll say, while I is greater than 0, and I minus minus, which will decrease the value of I by 1. This is called decrementing I, as opposed to incrementing I. So now if we run this, then the first element is going to fill up with the value 999, and it works its way all the way down to 1. Let's change our value of I to just start with array1.length, just so we can watch this crash, just to see what happens. We'll go int I equals array1.length, and this time it will throw an out of bounds exception. So it just says, hey, you can't do this, index 1000 is out of bounds, since the length is 1000. Then the last element in the array is the length minus 1, so 999. So the point to remember when you're starting to write for loops is the size of the array is always one more than the last element. So the last element always equals the size minus 1. Now let's fill up our array with random values. I'll change the int I equals array1.length back to length minus 1 so that this will run. And then we'll say array1I equals a set of parentheses, the word int, and then math.random, another set of parentheses, times 10. And this can be a little bit hard to read at first. Math.random returns a value between 0 and 0 point repeating 9. And then we're multiplying that number by 10, which gives us a value between 0 and 9 point repeating 9. But we have a little bit of a problem in that we want to store an integer inside of array1I, but math.random returns a double. If we hover over it, it says double java.lang.math.random. So it's going to return us a double value, but we want an integer value to store inside of our integer array. So the way we get around that is we just type a set of parentheses with int inside of it, and this casts the double as an integer, which just means it converts it into an integer. And the way that it converts it is just by getting rid of the decimals. So this brings us from between 0 and 9 point repeating 9 to just between 0 and 9. Because whatever value we'll have from math.random times 10, it's just going to take off the decimals when it converts it from a double to an integer. Our system.out.println right now is above the assignment into our integer array. Let's take it and put it below the assignment so that it's not just printing out the value of I. This time we want it to print out the value of the ith element of array1. So we'll say array1I. Let's get rid of our top system.out.println statement. And let's run this, and we'll have an array of integer variables. All of the values will be between 0 and 9. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. I'll put some resources in the description for anyone just learning to code, just to some of my longer Java videos, and to some really good books to read if you're starting learning Java.